"I'm not crying," she snapped, her voice cracking like frost underfoot. "The heater's broken, that's all." Graham Cole stopped mid-step, one gloved hand still on the doorknob of the barracks maintenance wing. The December wind howled behind him, tugging at his flannel collar. But it was the voice, raw, brittle, that froze him in place. He took a slow step inside. The room was dim, lit only by a flickering fluorescent bulb. The heating unit buzzed, working half-heartedly against the cold that crept in through every crack. And there, hunched at the edge of the narrow bunk bed, was a young woman in uniform, her frame tense, arms wrapped tightly around herself like a failing shield. "I didn't mean to intrude," Graham said softly. His voice carried the weight of quiet winters and men who had learned to speak gently or not at all. The woman didn't look up. "Just came to check on the heater," he added, setting down his toolbox. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, crowded with whatever she'd been trying to keep from spilling out. He could hear her swallow, could see the way her fingers clutched the edge of a crumpled photograph in her lap. "You always fix things this late?" she asked, her voice hoarse but steady now, like someone too tired to keep lying. Graham allowed a small smile. "Only when they break at the worst possible time." She gave a half-laugh. It wasn't joy. It was the sound of someone who hadn't laughed properly in weeks, maybe months. Then she finally looked at him. Her eyes, ice blue and ringed with exhaustion, held his gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable. But Graham didn't flinch. He had seen eyes like that before, on the battlefield, in the mirror. "I'm Willa," she said. "Private Willa Hart." "Graham," he replied simply, not offering a rank because he didn't have one anymore. "You're the boiler guy?" she asked. "Among other things," he said, crouching by the heating unit. "I fix what I can, leave the rest to the coffee machine." That earned a faint smile, barely there, but real. She tucked the photo under her pillow, quickly, like it might dissolve if anyone else looked at it too long. He didn't ask. He never asked too soon. Instead, he worked in silence, the kind that invited honesty without demanding it. The heater sputtered back to life after a few quiet minutes. Warmth began to push against the chill in the room, but it wasn't the heater she needed fixed. "I couldn't tell him," Willa said suddenly, voice barely above a whisper. I opened my mouth, and the words just stuck. Graham didn't move. He didn't ask who. He didn't need to. She continued, not looking at him. "He's 6. He still draws her pictures, still thinks she's just sick in some hospital that doesn't take visitors." Her fingers were trembling now. "I mailed his letter to nowhere today," she said, laughing bitterly. "Stamped it and everything. Addressed it to heaven, care of God, like a damn fool." The heater hummed beside them. "You're not a fool," Graham said gently. "You don't know me," she replied. "I don't need to." She turned her head toward him again, eyes shining now, not just from tears, but from the terrifying vulnerability of someone who had kept everything inside for too long. "He's all I've got," she whispered. "If I break, what happens to him?" The words hung in the air, trembling like a string pulled too tight. Graham stood slowly. He didn't offer her empty comfort, didn't promise things he couldn't guarantee. He just reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small packet of hot cocoa. "Emergency rations," he said, placing it gently on her bunk. "Best used in the company of someone else." She stared at it like it was a relic. Then, finally, she nodded. "Thanks," she murmured. Graham turned to leave, but paused at the door. The wind outside had softened, just a little, or maybe it only sounded that way after being in the room with her. "For what it's worth," he said, without looking back. "People like you." who break quietly so others don't have to. They're the strongest ones I've ever met. Then he stepped out into the cold, and behind him, in a room that no longer felt quite so empty, a young soldier sat holding a packet of cocoa like it was a life raft. Her hands still trembled, but her heart, just for a moment, felt the first flicker of warmth that hadn't come from the heater. The next morning, Graham didn't mention Willa to anyone. Not the guy in logistics who always talked too loud. Not the admin clerk who tried too hard to be funny. Not even to the sergeant major who'd once said, "You fix pipes, not people." Graham had learned a long time ago, the most important things didn't belong in conversations. They belonged in silence. He just showed up early, toolbox in hand, sipping lukewarm gas station coffee like it was his daily penance. But his mind wasn't on boilers or busted circuits. It was on her, on the way she'd sat like her whole world was balanced on the edge of that bunk, on the way her voice cracked, not from weakness, but from carrying too much for too long. And most of all, on the photo. He had only caught a glimpse, but it had felt like a punch to the chest. 3 people, a woman, a girl, a little boy with a gap-toothed grin. That picture had said more than Willa ever could, and somehow it felt familiar, uncomfortably so. That afternoon, Graham found himself inside the storage bay, organizing old parts no one cared about anymore. Wires, fittings, valves, things that used to matter when everything ran slower and people had time to fix what broke. But that wasn't what he was really doing. He was stalling, because in less than an hour he knew Willa would finish her shift and probably walk through the snow alone, back to that barracks. And part of him wanted to walk with her, not to protect her, not even to fix anything, just to be there. But he didn't get the chance, because she found him first. "You always sort bolts alphabetically," Willa asked from behind him, arms crossed over her coat like she hadn't been freezing all morning. Graham turned, caught off guard. "Only when I'm avoiding lunch." She tilted her head, gave him that same look from the night before, like she was weighing him against something no one else could see. "I never got to say thanks," she said. "You don't have to." "I know. That's why I'm saying it." Graham nodded. "You holding up?" Willa let out a breath that wasn't quite a sigh. "Depends on the hour." He waited. She sat on an overturned crate across from him. Snowflakes clung to her shoulders, her boots caked in slush. "You ever lose someone and then forget they're gone?" she asked suddenly. "Like, you go to text them or reach for the phone, and then it hits you. They're not just missing. They're never coming back." Graham didn't answer right away. Then he said quietly, "Every damn Christmas." That surprised her. She looked up, a flicker of something shifting in her eyes. Respect, maybe, or just recognition. "Who was it?" she asked. "My wife," he said. 4 years ago. Car accident. Ice on the road. We were supposed to watch our daughter's recital that night. I'm sorry." He nodded once. "So was I." They sat in silence. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope. The address was handwritten in shaky kid print. "To Mom. From Max. Merry Christmas." Graham took it gently. "Your brother?" She nodded. "He thinks she's still in the hospital, still drawing her letters every week. I pretend to mail them, just like she used to pretend the rent was paid." The corners of her mouth twitched. "Funny how we become what we grow up around. Or what we promised we'd never be," Graham murmured. Willa looked down at the concrete floor. "I haven't cried like that in years, not even at the funeral." "You cried last night," he said. "Yeah," she said softly. "And I hated it." "Why?" She looked up, eyes clear now. "Because it made me feel real, and being real hurts. Graham leaned back. So does being human, but it's the only thing that keeps us from turning to stone. She let the words hang in the air, like she needed to breathe them in before they disappeared. Then she asked the question he didn't expect. "Why are you still here, Graham?" He hesitated. "At this base?" "No, in this job. Fixing leaks and burnt-out lights. You don't wear this place the way others do. You carry it." That hit deeper than she probably meant it to. He looked at her, really looked, at the pain behind her eyes, the fire she tried to smother, the strength laced into her silence. "You want the truth," he said. She nodded. "I'm here because this is the only place I still feel useful. Because grief doesn't like quiet. It screams in silence. So I stay busy. I fix things that don't talk back." Willa smiled, softly, sadly. "You fixed the heater last night," she said, "but I think you fixed something else too." They both fell silent again. Then Graham stood and offered her his thermos. "Hot chocolate, real kind, made it myself." She raised an eyebrow. "You cook?" "I survive," he said. "That's half the battle." She took the cup, sipped, and closed her eyes. "God, that tastes like childhood," she said. "Like winter didn't suck, and Mom still hummed songs in the kitchen." He chuckled. "You remember the tune." "Not the words," she said, her voice turning wistful, "but the melody. It's in my bones." "Sing it sometime," he said. "You might be surprised who remembers it too." Her eyes snapped to his. "What does that mean?" He shook his head. "Nothing. Just some songs never really leave us." Later that night, Graham pulled out an old journal from the bottom drawer of his locker. He turned to a weathered page. Tucked inside was a crayon drawing of a man with angel wings and a blue flannel shirt. At the bottom, written in uneven letters, "Thank you, angel man. From Willa." And in that moment, the past and present collided quietly in his hands. She was that girl, the one from 10 years ago, the one he had pulled from a snowbank along with her mother, the one who had drawn him wings. And now, she was here, grown, breaking, but not broken. Graham closed the journal, his fingers lingering on the drawing. "She doesn't remember yet," he whispered to the night. "But maybe she will." It wasn't the photo that convinced him. Not entirely. Not even the gap-toothed boy with the crayon drawing clutched in his tiny hand, or the woman in the middle whose tired eyes held decades of quiet survival. It was the name. Hart. Willa Hart. Graham hadn't heard it in 10 years, but the moment he saw it on the personnel roster posted outside the mess hall, something in him locked into place, like a door that had been cracked open for years, finally swung wide. He stood there longer than necessary, pretending to read the rest of the names, but none of them mattered. Only one did. Willa Hart. That night he returned to his room and dug out the journal again. The same one he hadn't touched in months before last night. His fingers moved slowly, reverently, like turning pages in a sacred text. And there it was, pressed between 2 aging sheets of cheap paper, curled and slightly faded, but still intact. A child's drawing, an angel with crooked wings and a lopsided halo, a man with a blue flannel shirt and messy brown hair, and at the bottom, in shaky, determined letters, "Thank you, angel man, from Willa." He sat there for a long time, staring at it under the yellow lamplight. His chest tightened, not from grief exactly, but from something older, something deeper. Gratitude, memory, A second chance. 10 years ago, on a night much like this one, Graham had been driving home from a long shift in his rescue unit when a call came through. Blinding snow, black ice. A car had gone off the road near mile marker 42. He didn't hesitate. He never did. By the time he got there, the vehicle was halfway down an embankment, front end crumpled against a pine. Inside, a woman, early 30s, bleeding from the forehead, was trapped beneath a collapsed steering column. Graham had climbed through the broken glass, hands cut and numb, and pulled her free. She'd begged him not to leave. "My daughter," she'd gasped. "Back seat. Please, get her." He had. A little girl, shaking, eyes wide with silent terror, clinging to a doll with one arm and the seatbelt with the other. He'd unbuckled her and lifted her gently into his arms. She hadn't said a word, just stared up at him like he wasn't quite real. Later that night, in the warmth of the ER waiting room, the girl had approached him with a coloring book page torn out and colored in crayon. She had handed it to him solemnly and whispered, "You're my angel." He'd smiled, awkward and tired and stunned, and said something like, "I'm just a guy who showed up." And she'd said the line that still echoed in his bones, "Angels always show up when it matters." He never saw them again, until now. The next day, Graham found Willa in the Barracks laundry room. She was folding shirts with mechanical precision, as if routine could anchor her in place. "Need a hand?" he asked casually, leaning against the doorway. She glanced up. "Unless you're certified in sock matching, probably not." He chuckled. "I've seen worse puzzles." She smirked, but didn't push him away. He stepped closer, picked up a rogue glove from the floor. "You always this organized?" She shrugged. "Helps me think, or not think." Graham nodded, watching her hands move, efficient and quiet. Then he said, carefully, "I saw your name on the duty roster yesterday." She paused, mid-fold. "Hart," he added. "That your mother's name, too?" Willa's eyes flicked to his, guarded now. "Yeah, Elaine Hart." "Why?" Graham hesitated. Then, "I knew someone named Elaine once, years ago. Bad car accident. Winter storm." Willa stopped folding. "Wait," she whispered. "Where?" "Mile 42, he said softly, her lips parted slightly. She took a step back. "That was... you..." Her voice broke. "You were there?" "I was first on scene," he said gently. "I pulled her out. And... you..." Willa stared at him like he'd just rearranged her entire history. "You had a doll," he said. "Red dress, button eyes." Her hand flew to her chest, like she could feel the memory pressing against her. "Her name was Millie." Graham nodded. "You gave me a drawing, said I was an angel. I was 7. She whispered, "I remember. I didn't think you were real." He opened his journal slowly and turned it around, showed her the page. Her breath caught. That's mine," she said, eyes wide. "I remember those crayons. I only had 5 colors back then. That's why the wings are orange." He smiled. "I've kept it, all these years." Willa reached out and touched the edge of the page like it might vanish if she blinked too fast. "I always wondered if you were just a dream," she said. "Mom never stopped talking about you. She called you the man who gave her back time." "She gave me something too," Graham said. "What?" He looked straight at her. "She gave me the reason to believe that one act of kindness could echo for a lifetime." Tears welled in Willa's eyes, but didn't fall. Her voice was steady when she spoke again. "You showed up when we needed you most. And now, here you are again." "I didn't plan it," he said. "But maybe some things aren't meant to be planned." She stepped back, her arms folding across her chest, but not defensively. "Do you think—" She hesitated, then asked, "Do you think people come back into our lives for a reason?" "I think," Graham said softly, "sometimes the people who saved us come back so we can save them too." And with that, the space between them no longer felt filled with unanswered questions, but with something deeper, like fate had just taken a breath and exhaled. That night, alone in her bunk, Willa stared at the drawing Graham had returned to her. Still kept. Always. She placed it gently under her pillow, like a child tucking hope to sleep. And for the first time in years, she whispered aloud in the dark, "Thank you, Angel Man." And for the first time in a decade, she meant it not just as memory, but as beginning. The barracks were never silent, not truly. Even at night, when the lights dimmed and boots were kicked under bunks, there was always the low hum of breath, the creak of bed springs, the rustle of sheets trying to muffle dreams too heavy to hold. But in Willa's corner, silence reigned. It wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the kind that wrapped around her like armor, quiet, rigid, and impenetrable. And Graham had learned to recognize it. He didn't intrude. He watched. From across hallways, from behind tool carts, from the edges of shared spaces where words were optional and presence was everything. He saw the way she helped others without being asked, carrying supplies for a private nursing a twisted ankle, offering her extra gloves to a rookie who forgot his in the snow. Never loud, never showy, just present in all the ways that mattered. But when the day ended, and others laughed at dumb jokes in the common room or passed around greasy takeout, Willa slipped away. Always alone, always carrying something she never spoke about. And one night, Graham saw it. He'd returned to the barracks late, having stayed behind to fix a leaking pipe in the mess hall. Snow clung to his boots. His shoulders ached. He moved quietly down the corridor, intending to grab the scarf he'd forgotten in his locker. That's when he saw her. Willa sat on her bunk, her back slightly hunched, shoulders drawn tight like a bowstring. Her face was dimly lit by the yellow bulb above her, and in her hands was a half-open envelope. Not addressed to her. It was addressed to Mac's heart. She held a pen like it was a weapon she couldn't wield. Her eyes scanned a worn notebook, as if looking for the right lie to tell. Then she began to write. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm still getting stronger every day. The doctors say I'll be home soon. Did you draw anything for me this week?" Her handwriting was steady, too steady, the kind that comes from someone who's written the same thing too many times. She paused, her lips pressing into a line. Then, softer than a breath, she whispered, "I miss you more than anything, baby boy. Love, Mom." Graham didn't move, didn't make a sound. He simply watched as she folded the paper with the reverence of a sacred ritual, slid it into the envelope, sealed it. Then she held it to her chest and closed her eyes. And broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just one tear. Just one breath that hitched and stuttered. But Graham felt it like thunder in his chest. The next morning, Willa was at roll call like nothing happened. She laughed when someone made a joke about the coffee tasting like battery acid. She handed out protein bars she claimed were leftovers, even though Graham knew she probably skipped breakfast herself. He pulled her aside gently after her shift. "You're not sleeping much, are you?" She raised an eyebrow. "You stalking me now, boiler guy?" He gave a half smile. "Maybe." She leaned against the wall, arms folded. "Sleep's a luxury I can't afford." "What about truth?" Her smile faltered. "I saw you," he said quietly. "Last night." Willa's jaw clenched, her eyes narrowed, but not with anger, with fear. Like he'd just opened a door she was desperate to keep locked. "I didn't mean to eavesdrop," he said quickly. "But, Willa, why keep pretending?" She looked away. "Because it's easier than telling him the truth." Graham didn't press. Instead, he said something that surprised even himself. "After my wife died, my daughter asked every night when she was coming home. For 3 months I said, 'Soon.'" Willa blinked. Her voice dropped. "How old was she?" "4. She nodded. "Max just turned 6. I threw him a birthday party on video chat from the Barracks break room. Told him Mom sent hugs through the screen." She ran a hand through her hair. "I haven't figured out how to kill the fantasy without breaking the kid." "You're not killing anything," Graham said. "You're trying to give him a soft landing. But the longer the fall, the harder the crash." Silence fell between them again. Then Willa whispered, "He still sets a place at the table for her. Every night." Graham's heart twisted. "He told me once, if you set a place, they don't stay gone all the way." Her voice cracked. "How do you take that away from a 6-year-old? "You don't," Graham said. "But you show him that the love doesn't die with her. That someone's still here. Still choosing to stay." She looked up, eyes sharp, pained. "I don't know if I'm enough," she admitted. And Graham stepped closer, his voice low, but unshakable. "The people who worry they're not enough usually are the ones holding up the world." Willa didn't cry, but she breathed. Really breathed. For the first time in days, that night, Graham sat alone with the crayon drawing again. Not just as a memory, but as a mirror. Because what he saw in Willa now wasn't just the girl he'd rescued from a snowbank. It was himself, years ago, sitting on a cold floor, writing bedtime stories to a child who would never hear them again, just to feel like he was still a father. And somehow, in watching Willa hold up the world for Max, he felt the pieces of himself being stitched back together, not loudly, not all at once, but gently, like forgiveness, like purpose, rediscovered in the hands of a soldier who still believed in make-believe letters and bedtime promises whispered across time zones. And somewhere, in a small town miles away, a little boy named Max opened his envelope, smiled, and whispered to no one, "She's getting better." And in that lie, there was love. And in that love, a miracle waited to unfold. There were 2 things Graham Cole had always believed in. Silence could heal, and kindness didn't need credit. So when he began helping Willa, he did it quietly. No speeches, no confessions, no heroic gestures. Just small things. A package on her bunk containing a new sketchbook and a pack of colored pencils, sent anonymously from a Veterans Family Support Fund. A carton of shelf-stable milk tucked into her locker with a post-it note. "For the little guy, keep going." A soft wool scarf, folded neatly inside her duffel, the tag still attached. Each item small enough to go unnoticed by others, yet precise enough to make her stop and wonder. She never said anything aloud. But Graham noticed the way her fingers lingered a moment longer on the sketchbook, the way she folded the scarf more carefully than the others, the way her shoulders eased just a little when she thought no one was watching. And then one night, it happened. Graham was making his rounds near the barracks courtyard, checking heat sensors along the old brick wall. Snow had just begun to fall, soft and steady, like ash from a sky trying to remember grace. He paused beneath the glow of the security light. That's when he heard it. A voice, gentle, unpolished, and almost lost in the wind. Willa was sitting alone on the steps outside the barracks, elbows on her knees, eyes on the stars, and she was singing. Not loud, not perfectly, but with something deeper than melody. A lullaby, just a fragment of one. Hush now, little light, sleep through the stormy night. The tune drifted up like breath in the cold, fragile but rooted, and it stopped Graham in his tracks, because he knew that song. He had heard Elaine Hart hum it 10 years ago, when she was still trembling in a hospital bed, cradling her daughter's hand and whispering, "This is what I sang when you were small." He hadn't realized he remembered it, until now, and now, her daughter was singing it, carrying it, keeping it alive. He reached for his phone, not to interrupt, not to take anything from her, but just to capture a memory that already belonged to her. A quiet recording, a whisper in time. The next day, he sent it to an old friend, Benji Carr, a former Marine-turned-musician who owed Graham more than a few favors. "Make this into something she'll never forget," Graham wrote. "Use her voice. Keep it pure." Within 3 days, Benji replied with a file and a question. "Want it on vinyl, or should we get poetic?" Graham didn't hesitate. He ordered a handcrafted music box. Walnut wood. Simple design. No embellishments. Just an engraved line on the inside lid. For nights when silence is too loud. Inside, Benji had embedded the track. An acoustic instrumental woven with soft strings, brushed piano, and Willa's humming layered like a thread of memory beneath the melody. It didn't sound professional. It sounded real, intimate, familiar. It sounded like love, not romantic love. Not yet, but the kind of love that shows up quietly in the moments no one else sees. That evening, Graham left the box at Willa's door, just before lights out. No note, no name, just a ribbon tied with care, and the hope that something broken inside her might recognize the hands that had held it once before. Willa found it the next morning. The music box was small enough to fit in her palm, but when she opened it, the room around her seemed to vanish. The first soft notes filled the air, and her breath caught. Then came her own voice, woven into the melody like smoke around a flame. Her fingers trembled. She didn't remember recording it, but she knew the song. She remembered singing it to Max on the night of their mother's funeral. They'd sat on the living room floor, surrounded by unopened casseroles and unopened grief. Max had asked if she knew any songs that made the dark feel less scary. She had hummed what she could remember. He had fallen asleep in her lap, and she had cried so softly she barely noticed the sound. And now, someone had turned that fragile moment into something tangible, into something immortal. Her eyes welled up, not just with sorrow, but with something even heavier. Recognition. Not of the sender, but of being seen. Really seen, for all she was trying to hold together, for all she had quietly lost, and all she still dared to protect. That night, Graham walked past her bunk and saw the music box resting on her pillow. She wasn't there, but someone had placed a note next to it. Not signed, not fancy, just one sentence scribbled in Willa's familiar handwriting. "Thank you for giving me back the part of her I thought I lost." Graham read it, folded it, and tucked it inside his journal, across from the crayon drawing. Later, as snow whispered against the windows and the bass fell into a hush, Graham lay in bed and listened to the melody playing faintly through the wall. Willa was playing the song again, not once, but on repeat. And in the repetition, Graham heard it, not the music, but her healing, breath by breath, note by note. Because sometimes the things that saved us weren't loud. They didn't knock. They didn't announce their arrival. They just waited at the door, in a box of walnut wood, holding a piece of someone you thought was gone, and whispered, "You are not alone." The package was small, no bigger than a shoebox, wrapped in plain brown paper and tied with a simple twine bow. There was no return address, no note, just a white tag tucked beneath the string with her name in careful handwriting. Willa. She found it waiting on her bunk late one afternoon, just as the sun dipped below the barracks roofline, casting long amber streaks across the concrete floor. She turned it over in her hand slowly, her pulse skipping. Something about it felt intentional, not official, not routine. Something personal. Graham didn't stay to see her open it. He had left it there 15 minutes earlier, just before final checks on the east wing heater. He told himself he didn't need to witness the moment. He told himself it was enough that she'd see it, that the truth, at least the part that mattered, would begin to unfold on its own. And yet, he found himself drifting to the far end of the hallway, where he could see the edge of her bunk through the reflection in the glass trophy case. Not close enough to hear, but close enough to feel it. Willa untied the string and peeled back the paper like she was afraid of breaking whatever lay beneath. And then she saw it. A wooden frame. Simple, but lovingly made. Inside it, carefully preserved behind museum-grade glass, was a crayon drawing. Uneven lines, bright orange wings, a lopsided halo floating above a stick-figure man in a blue shirt. And beneath it, etched in soft gold on the matting, still kept, always. She blinked. Once, twice. Her hands trembled. Then she dropped to sit on the edge of the bed, as her body gave in to the flood that rose in her chest. She remembered, not just the drawing, not just the day she'd made it, but the feeling, the fear of losing her mother, the warmth of the stranger's arms as he carried her out of the snow, the scratchy flannel shirt, the way he had knelt beside her in the waiting room and accepted her childish gift like it was something sacred. She had been 7, and she had believed, fully, fiercely, that she had met an angel. Now, 10 years later, that belief returned in a single breathless whisper. Who keeps something like this? Tears rolled down her cheeks before she could stop them. She clutched the frame to her chest, not caring that the glass pressed cold against her shirt. Her breath came in quiet sobs, not of grief, but of awe. Because someone, somewhere, had remembered her not as a soldier, not as a burden, not as a sad-eyed girl trying to be brave, but as a child who had once given light to a stranger. And now, somehow that light had come back to her. She sat there for a long time, cradling the memory. Across the hall, Graham leaned quietly against the wall, out of sight. He could hear nothing. But somehow, he knew, that evening, Willa brought the frame into the common room and placed it gently on the bookshelf above the chessboard. No one used. The room hushed when she did, eyes drawn to the strange, tender gesture. Private Jensen asked softly, "That yours?" She nodded. "Looks like a kid's drawing," he added, blinking. "It is," Willa said. "Mine. From when I was 7. There was silence. Then she added, more to herself than anyone else, "I gave it to someone who saved me and my mom, and he kept it." Another beat of quiet. Then Jensen murmured, "Man must have known it mattered." Willa smiled faintly, fingers brushing the frame. I think he knew it before I did." Later that night, Willa sat by herself in the laundry room, music box resting beside her, the frame clutched in her lap. She whispered into the still air, "You saw me when I was small and broken, and you still kept me. And somehow, without ever saying a word, you came back. She didn't know who had sent it. She didn't know how it had found her. But she knew this much. It wasn't coincidence. This, like the music box, like the packages, like the steady kindness that had started threading through her impossible days, was someone's quiet answer to her deepest ache. And though she couldn't say his name, her heart had already begun to draw a line between what was and what had always been. In his quarters, Graham sat at his desk, flipping through his journal again. The page where the drawing had once been was now empty, but in its place, he had written a single line beneath a piece of fresh paper. She doesn't remember it was me, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is that something small and good survived. He closed the book and leaned back, eyes stinging not from sorrow, but from relief. Because for the first time in years, he wasn't just fixing things. He was giving something back. Not with fanfare, not with a signature, but with the slow, deliberate tenderness of a man who had learned that the most powerful miracles are the ones that come wrapped in ordinary moments. And in a quiet room where memories met melody and color, a soldier held a picture from her childhood and smiled through her tears, because someone, somewhere, had kept a piece of her heart safe until she was ready to hold it again. The wind that night howled like it was trying to tear secrets from the sky. Snow fell in thick, lazy spirals, blanketing the military base in white silence. Most of the troops were inside by now, huddled in the warmth of shared stories and instant coffee. But Graham was outside, alone, kneeling beside the base of an old pipe behind the barracks. The heating line had been temperamental all week, and tonight it gave up altogether. He worked without gloves, fingers red from cold, wrench in one hand, a weathered notebook balanced awkwardly in the other. He flipped it open now and then, studying a hand-drawn schematic. Half grease, half memory. From a few yards away, Willa watched. She had been on her way to the mess hall, but the sight of Graham, the silent boiler man, crouched in the snow with a stubborn kind of grace, stopped her. And it wasn't just the way he moved. It was the notebook. The cover was cracked leather, edges softened with time. Familiar. She approached slowly. You know there's a reason most people wait until daylight for that kind of job. Graham looked up, startled, but not annoyed. Yeah, well, boilers don't exactly follow office hours. She chuckled, then eyed the notebook. What's that? He hesitated for a beat, then offered it to her. Just old notes, repairs, some things I like to keep close. Willa took it gently, flipping through pages of sketches, to-do lists, even a few doodles in the margins. A smiling sun, a crooked wrench, a coffee mug. And then she saw it. A name, scrawled in the corner of one page. Willa Bug. Her breath caught. She looked up at him. What? Did you just call me? Graham blinked. I didn't say anything. No, she said, stepping closer. You called me Willa Bug. He froze. The snow swirled between them, as if the world itself was holding its breath. That's what my mom used to call me, she whispered. No one else. Ever. His jaw tightened. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, softly. She said it once, in the hospital, after we got her inside. You were holding her hand. Willa stared at him. Hospital. Graham looked down at the wrench in his hand, as if it could shield him from the weight of what he was about to say. It was a storm. 10 years ago. I was passing through Highway 76 when I saw her car stuck in a snowbank. No one else around. I pulled her out. You were asleep in the back seat. He looked up, voice barely above a whisper. You were shivering so bad. I wrapped you in my flannel and carried you to the truck. Willa's lips parted, but no words came. Her eyes searched his face as memories tumbled like loose snow. Graham continued, his voice deep and steady. Your mom kept saying, please save her first. She's all I have. I told her she'd both be okay. He paused. And you gave me a crayon drawing before the ambulance came. Called me your angel man. Her eyes filled with tears. You kept it, she whispered. He nodded. Still kept. Always. Willa pressed her hand over her mouth as emotion surged. She told me. All these years, she told me an angel saved us. That's why I became a soldier. I wanted to become someone's angel too. The silence that followed was filled with falling snow and breaking walls. Graham stepped closer, his voice hushed but firm. You already are, Willa. You've been that for Max, for the girls in your unit, for anyone who's ever seen you show up when no one else did. Tears streamed down her cheeks, leaving warm trails on frozen skin. She shook her head, voice shaking. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because it was never about me, Graham said. It was about the light I saw in you then, and the strength I see in you now. He took a breath, snow gathering on his shoulders like frost on old armor. I didn't come back to be remembered. I came back because I couldn't forget. Willa covered her mouth again, overcome, and then she reached out, slowly, carefully, and placed her gloved hand over his. Thank you, she whispered, for that night, for everything since. He squeezed her hand gently. Some things are worth waiting 10 years for. They stood there like that, beneath the frozen sky, in the quiet hum of something ancient and alive. No longer strangers, no longer hidden. Just two hearts, rediscovered beneath the snow. Later that night, Willa sat by her bunk, music box open, playing the song of her mother's lullaby. The framed drawing rested beside it. She closed her eyes and whispered into the silence. You didn't just save me once. You saved me again by letting me remember who I was. And across the base, in a workshop filled with boiler pipes and second chances, Graham stood alone and whispered back, Welcome home, Willa Bug. It was Sunday when Willa finally invited him. The snow had let up, but the air still held that quiet sharpness only a December afternoon could bring. Graham stood outside the modest townhouse near the edge of base housing, one hand in his coat pocket, the other gripping a paper bag filled with groceries, and a second, smaller surprise. Willa opened the door before he could knock. You made it, she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, suddenly looking more like the young mother she was, and less like the soldier everyone else saw. I said I would, Graham replied. Her eyes softened. Max is excited. He thinks we're having a guest from Mars or something. He drew signs. Graham chuckled. I've been called worse. As he stepped inside, warmth rushed over him, not just from the heater humming dutifully, but from the scent of something baking and the faint music playing on an old stereo, but mostly from the little boy who came sprinting around the corner, socks sliding on hardwood, a crayon-streaked piece of paper clutched in his hand. Are you Mr. Graham? Max asked, stopping just short of him and peering up with cautious wonder. I am, Graham said, kneeling so they were eye to eye. Max held out his drawing. It was crude and wonderful, a smiling man with long arms, standing tall beneath a bright yellow sun. But what stopped Graham cold were the wings. Big, sweeping, silver-blue wings stretching out from the man's shoulders. I drew you, Max said proudly. Mom said you helped us a lot, so I made you an angel." Graham's throat tightened. He looked up at Willa, who stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, watching, her eyes already glassy. Graham turned back to Max and whispered, "That's the kindest thing anyone's ever given me." The boy beamed. I put it on the fridge. Later, while Max took a nap with a comic book over his chest, Willa poured them each a mug of tea and sat across from Graham at the kitchen table. She looked tired, but not defeated, just human. "Max thinks the world still has angels in it," she said, stirring her tea. "I used to think that too, until I saw how easily people leave." Graham didn't interrupt. He knew some things had to be said in their own time. She continued, voice quieter. "The day my mom died, I promised myself I'd never rely on anyone again. That if I wanted Max to have stability, I had to carry it all. Every fear, every bill, every broken thing, on my own." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "But then you showed up, and suddenly, there was someone at the end of the hallway again. Someone who noticed the broken heaters, and the broken people." Graham reached across the table, gently laying his calloused hand over hers. "I didn't come back looking to save anyone," he said. "I just couldn't forget what mattered. And you mattered, Willa. You still do." Tears welled in her eyes again, not from sadness, from recognition. "Do you ever get tired?" she asked softly. "Every day. Then why keep showing up?" He smiled. "Because someone once handed me a picture of an angel, and I started to believe maybe I could become one." She laughed through her tears, wiping them away. "You're not very good at resting, are you?" "Not when there's warmth to return," he said, squeezing her hand. A beat passed, then another, and finally, in a voice barely above a breath, she said, "I don't know if I believe in fairy tales anymore, but I know I believe in this moment." Graham stood, walked slowly around the table, and knelt beside her like he had 10 years before, only this time, not to carry, but to stay. "I won't make promises wrapped in silver," he said, "and I can't promise there won't be hard days." He reached for her hand again, this time with both of his. "But if you'll let me, I'd like to walk whatever path is ahead with you, and with Max. Not as a rescuer, not as a ghost from the past, just a man who finally found something worth staying for." She didn't answer with words. She simply leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his, her hands wrapping around his like vines around an anchor. And in that moment, nothing needed fixing. Nothing needed explaining. Later that evening, Max wandered into the living room, rubbing his eyes. "Is he still here?" he asked. Willa smiled and looked toward Graham, who sat on the floor, cross-legged, repairing the loose hinge on Max's toy box. "He's still here," she said. Max nodded. "Good." He crawled into her lap and whispered, "Can he stay for Christmas?" Willa kissed the top of his head, then looked over at Graham. Her eyes filled with something steady, something finally beginning to root. She answered without hesitation, "Yeah, baby, he can stay for Christmas. And maybe, just maybe, for every day after that." There was no snow that morning, only frost, like lace on every window pane, and chain-link fence around the barracks. But inside, something warmer stirred. Graham had started planning weeks before. Quietly, carefully. He never asked for much, only walked through the halls with that quiet fire in his eyes, asking soldiers if they had anything to spare. An extra book, a wrapped granola bar, an old flashlight that still worked. Not for himself, but for a little boy who deserves a Christmas memory he won't forget. And they gave. Oh, they gave more than he'd expected. Not because of obligation, but because even the toughest of them, the ones with tattoos and haunted stares, had felt something shift since the day Willa and her son became part of their broken family. Christmas Eve arrived like a held breath. That night, the barracks were darker than usual, a blackout done on purpose. Graham had sent Max and Willa into town on the excuse of needing milk and time to wrap a very important surprise. Meanwhile, he and 6 volunteers got to work. At exactly 7:12 p.m., the base generator flickered back on, and Willa, holding Max's hand, stepped into the dimly lit rec room and froze. Her breath caught. Max's eyes widened into full moons. Right there, in the center of the room, stood a Christmas tree unlike any other. It wasn't made of fir or pine. It was built from stacked old combat helmets, turned upside down and carefully bolted into tiers, their dull surfaces polished with motor oil and love. Inside each helmet glowed the soft light of miniature flashlights, rigged with thin copper wires and taped batteries. They shimmered like stars. At the base, small wrapped gifts were piled, not expensive, but all meaningful. Hand-knit socks from a grandmother in Georgia, a dog tag etched with Max's name, a copy of the Velveteen Rabbit with a note inside. "Read this out loud. It's important." Willa didn't speak. She couldn't. She looked up and saw Graham standing a little to the side, dust on his sleeves, eyes flickering in the warm light. Max tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, they made a tree, a real one, for us." She dropped to one knee and held him, her face buried in his shoulder. "Not just for us," she whispered, her voice cracking. "For love, for memory." Graham cleared his throat gently and stepped forward. "I've got one more thing," he said, kneeling beside Max and handing him a soft envelope. Max opened it, curiosity blooming. Inside was a folded piece of paper, aged but familiar. It was the letter Max had drawn weeks ago and mailed into the void, addressed in crayon to Heaven, care of my mom. The envelope bore a new stamp, handwritten, stamped in red ink. "Return to sender. Message seen." Max looked up. Puzzled, Willa leaned in as Graham gently unfolded the page. And there it was, his drawing, carefully preserved. Only now, beneath Max's original letter, another line had been added in looping cursive. "My dearest boy, I've seen every word, heard every prayer, and I am always watching. Love, Mom." Willa gasped softly. Max looked between the paper and Graham. "Did she really write this?" Graham didn't lie. He simply said, "Sometimes, when the heart cries loud enough, love finds a way to answer." Max hugged the paper to his chest, holding it like something holy. And in that moment, Willa realized this wasn't about pretending. It was about preserving, about protecting the wonder and light in a boy too young to carry the weight of grief. She turned to Graham, eyes shining. "How did you?" But he shook his head, smiling gently. "It wasn't me. It was all of us. Every soldier here, every broken man and woman who wanted to believe again, even for one night, that goodness still wins." In a soft guitar strummed in the corner, someone had pulled out an old 6-string, out of tune and perfect. Others began to hum. A few sang. Someone brought out cookies from home. A soldier who hadn't spoken in days handed Max a candy cane without a word, then sat beside him on the floor. It wasn't grand. It wasn't glittering. But it was real. And as Willa leaned against Graham, watching Max laugh beside people who once didn't know how to smile, she whispered, "This is the first time in years I felt like I wasn't just surviving. Graham looked at her, his voice low. "That's the magic of December, Willa. Not the snow, not the tree. It's the knowing that broken things can be beautiful again." She nodded slowly, and that maybe we were never alone. He looked across the room where Max sat between two grizzled Marines, one telling stories, the other braiding paracord into a bracelet for him. "Especially not him," Graham said. "That boy, he brought us all back to life." They stood in silence, two souls quietly resurrected by kindness and war stories and flashlight stars. And above them, the tree made of helmets shimmered, not in grief, but in glory. Because that night, in the heart of a battered barracks, something extraordinary was born. Not just a Christmas, but a family. The snow had returned, but this time it came soft. No wind, no storm. Just a quiet hush over the barracks, like the whole world had exhaled. Graham and Willa sat on the old bench tucked behind the motor pool, beneath the bare-limbed oak tree that had somehow withstood war, weather, and time. Above them, the stars blinked through drifting flakes like scattered lanterns. Neither spoke at first. Sometimes silence said more. Willa sipped from a tin mug of cocoa, the steam curling around her freckled face. Graham sat beside her, hands clasped, elbows on his knees. His breath rose in even clouds. Finally, she broke the stillness. 10 years, she said softly, eyes not leaving the sky. "You kept that drawing for 10 years?" He looked down, then slowly reached into his coat pocket. From inside, he pulled out the folded, time-worn piece of paper. Even through the lamplight, Willa could see the faded colors, the messy crayon wings, the stick figure man labeled Angel, and she smiled through a mist of emotion. "It's even worse than I remember." Graham chuckled. "It's perfect." A pause, then her voice, lower, more fragile. "Why?" He turned toward her. "Because some people walk into your life just once," he said, his voice steady. "But they leave behind a kind of light that keeps burning through the darkest winters." She blinked, and her lips parted slightly, like she wasn't sure whether to smile or cry. "That night, after we got your mom out of the snowstorm, I sat in my truck, shaking for an hour. I'd seen war. I'd lost my wife. I thought I was done feeling anything real." He unfolded the drawing, smoothing it with his hand. "Then this came, slipped through my driver's window, crumpled, smudged, but on it were wings, and hope, from a little girl who didn't even know my name." He looked at her, eyes shimmering beneath the frosty sky. "That was the night I stopped trying to disappear." Willa didn't speak for a moment. Then she whispered, "You saved more than my mother." A small silence passed between them. Then she added, "You saved the girl who drew that picture too, even if she didn't realize it until now." He glanced at her, but she wasn't crying. Not this time. She was strong, radiant. He opened his mouth to speak, but she shifted closer, gently resting her head on his shoulder. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was quiet, earnest, and it changed everything. "I used to think strength meant never leaning on anyone," she said. "Now I'm starting to believe strength might just be knowing who to lean on." Graham didn't move. He just let the warmth of her settle into him like fire through old bones. "I'm not perfect, Willa. I know. I come with rust and regrets." "I do too," she whispered, "so we match." He smiled into the night. Far off, the barracks lights flickered. A hum of distant laughter echoed from inside, Max's voice among them. Willa smiled. "He likes you, you know. Kids got questionable taste. No, she said, turning slightly. He sees people for who they really are. Always has. The first time he saw you, he said, "Mom, I think he's one of the good ones who got lost for a while." Graham's breath caught. He swallowed hard. "Smart kid." "He is," she said, tilting her head back to look at the sky. "But he's still a boy, and boys need someone to show them what staying looks like." Another silence. This one stretched, not awkward, not heavy, just whole. Then Graham said, almost to himself, "I never thought I'd find home again." Willa looked at him, then took his hand. "Maybe home isn't where you live," she whispered. "Maybe it's who you sit beside when the world goes quiet." He turned to her. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But something passed between them, deeper than a kiss. Truer. It was the kind of recognition that came not in rushes, but in rests, like music after silence. She leaned her head back onto his shoulder. He tucked her closer, and the stars above, ancient and indifferent, blinked down on two people who had fought so long to survive, and were finally learning to live. That night the snow kept falling, but for the first time in years. No one felt cold. The snow that morning was soft, like the kind you don't hear landing. The sky was pale, almost glowing, and the wind was gentle. Like it, too, knew not to speak too loud. Willa stood between two men who had, in their own ways, saved her life. One with his strength and silence, the other with his wonder and crayons. Graham held her gloved hand, warm and steady. Max walked ahead, carefully carrying a small bouquet of white lilies. His boots left tiny tracks in the fresh snow as he approached the grave marker. Marianne Hart, beloved mother, brave soul. She taught us to see light, even in blizzards. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Max bent down and placed the flowers just beneath his grandmother's name. He didn't speak right away. He just looked. And then, with a voice both innocent and ageless, he asked, "Do you think she knows about us?" Graham knelt beside him, resting a hand on Max's small shoulder. "She knows," he said quietly. "In fact, I think she had a hand in it." Max turned, eyes curious. Graham smiled gently. "Some people leave more than memories when they go. They leave directions." Willa stepped forward, her eyes glistening, her fingers fumbling with something in her coat pocket. A worn envelope. The edges soft, the ink fading. "I found this," she said, her voice catching, "in one of Mom's old boxes last week. She must have written it near the end, but never mailed it." She looked down at Graham and held the letter out to him. He hesitated, then took it with reverence. The paper trembled in his hands, not from the cold, but from the weight. He opened it slowly. Willa looked away as if bracing herself. Graham began to read aloud, his voice soft but unwavering. "My dearest Willa, if you're reading this, it means life took a turn I couldn't walk with you through. But I trust you're still standing, because you've always been my wildflower, the kind that grows through concrete. If one day, by some twist of grace, you find the man who carried me through the blizzard that night, if he's still out there, and you recognize that light in his eyes, keep him. Men like that don't come twice. They're not just kind. They're anchors in a world that drifts. Don't let go, even if it's hard, even if your heart is scared. And tell Max that love like that is never lost. It only waits. With all my heart, Mom." Silence blanketed them. Willa turned away, pressing her fingertips to her lips. Graham folded the letter carefully and returned it to her. "I think," he said, looking at her with a gaze full of history and promise. She saw this day long before we did. Willa nodded, tears streaking down her cheeks like melted snow. She always believed in the impossible, she whispered. Maybe, Graham said, reaching for her hand, because she knew that miracles don't always come with thunder. Sometimes they walk in wearing work boots and a tired smile. Max smiled up at them both. Like you, Graham. He chuckled, ruffled the boy's hair. Nah, I'm just the guy who found his way back when he thought the road had ended. They stood in stillness for a moment longer. Then Willa reached into her coat again and pulled out something else. A small wooden music box. She wound it once. The familiar lullaby. The one her mother used to sing. The one Graham had turned into music. Played gently beneath the winter sky. The three of them stood there, listening. Not to grieve, but to remember, to honor, and to begin. Because this wasn't the end. This was the first day of something truer, quieter, and more enduring than any storm. They walked away slowly, hand in hand, footsteps side by side in the snow. Behind them, the wind stirred softly around the grave, lifting the edge of the letter, as if someone unseen had leaned down to read it one last time, and above them the clouds parted just enough for one beam of light to slip through. Not bold, not blinding. Just enough to say, "I see you." Max looked up and grinned. "She's smiling." Willa looked at Graham. "So am I," she said. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "This time, Willa, I'm not going anywhere." And they kept walking. Three souls once scattered, now whole again, into a world still covered in snow, but warm beneath the skin. The kind of warmth that doesn't come from fire, but from finally coming home.